Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube session with Dr. Wagner. As you guys know, Dr. Paul Wagner has served as a full-time professor of philosophy uh, and logic with the College of Human Sciences and Humanities at the University of Houston Clear Lake. He is a professor of STEM education with the College of Education at the University of Houston Clear Lake. He is also former vice president of Association of Philosophers in Education, former executive secretary of the Philosophy of Education Society. Professor Wagner had an interesting career. He is honored by the Who's Who in America, Who's Who in the World, Who's Who in American Education, and Outstanding Young Men in America. After writing 11 books and 200 articles and counting, we are discussing today the book Love Trauma. This will be in um, more than one part. So today is part one. Dr. Wagner, once again, thank you. And yes, that book, we will have a link to the book in the description box. You taught a graduate class for a number of years that was cross listed at the university in both psychology and philosophy, titled Philosophy of Sex and Love. What was the class about? Years later, you wrote two books. One titled Love Trauma, and the second book is titled Beyond Love Trauma. Today, we are going to explore what you wrote in the book Love Trauma. So, if you could please first let us know what was the class about, and then we'll go into the book Love Trauma.
Well, Philosophy of Sex and Love was a graduate class, and it was based on a book by Roger Scruton called Philosophy of Sex. And of course, he went beyond just talking about sex. He talked about love, going back to Plato. And I had a lot of interesting students taking the class, oftentimes not for a degree, but they had something broken in their own life, often having to do with their own marital situation. And they took the class as a way of circumventing the standard talk about divorce and marriages having problems. They wanted something that was different. Philosophy sounded different. Would it be a philosophical take on this stuff? So even though the course was on philosophy of sex and love, we had to talk about the upside and the downside. When are you in love? Do you fall out of love? Does that make any sense? What is the role of sex? And all those things were drawn together, and it was a very interesting class. Uh, Very interesting. So,
Wow. What about so the book itself? The the title. The title is very suggestive. What is
love
love
trauma.
trauma?
Yeah. Well, back in the days, I noticed you mentioned that I had been named an outstanding young man, and you can tell from the picture now I'm no longer a young man, outstanding or otherwise. But there was a time when, I was very aware of a young man's world and thinking about people oftentimes anywhere from 30 years old to 50, and what life was like for them. And you think there's really very few traumatic events in most people's lives. Uh, Grief, the death of a dear one, either by disease or perhaps in combat. Um, the Getting married, people remember that. Being fired from a job, people remember that, like it or not. Having a baby, people remember that. Getting divorced, people will always remember as well. So it's something to remember, and it is traumatic. You will never outlive the experience of any of the things I just mentioned.
So, how does divorce count as love trauma?
Well, um, I think what happens with people, they use an expression like, well, we just grew apart. that everything that I've seen now, that's just ridiculous. No one just grows apart in a marriage. You have to work at growing apart. I mean, once you're married, you do it counts as a trauma because it is one of those things that happens in your life that you can never outlive. It will always be a part of you. Just like if a dear friend died, whether it be of illness or uh, combat or whatever it might have been, having each of your babies, getting a serious car accident, every one of those things will stay with you. And your marriage will always stay with you. And so will your divorce. You can never outlive the experience of any of the things I just listed. And in a case of divorce, is it traumatic? Well, of course it's traumatic because it ended in just the opposite direction of what the couple intended when they married. So, yeah, it's traumatic.
What do people think is going to happen when they marry?
Well, they think what's going to happen when they marry is they're going to ride off to the sunset and everything will be glowy and just wonderful. And husbands will get even more handsome and brides will get even more attractive. And everybody is going to be increasingly fond of one another and there will never be fights. And isn't that just Andy? And that's not what it is. I mean, everyone could say, look, we know there's ups and downs. Of course, there's ups and downs. But if you have the right stuff, the ups and downs both can bring you closer together. It all depends on how you manage the ups, and they're easy, and how you manage the downs. They're less easy. But if you manage both, then you don't need to worry about divorce pulling your marriage apart.
But I mean, no one really gets married thinking they're gonna get divorced, right? Like it's not even an option when you're getting married.
Right. And oftentimes it's because they were so enchanted either with the other person or perhaps just with the idea of marriage. Some people think it's a totem of getting older, like getting to be manager of a small company or something. You've accomplished something that you're supposed to accomplish in adult life, and that's not what marriage is all about. Marriage is supposed to be about two people forming a social entity that never before existed in the world. And they're going to take that social entity all the way until one of them cannot take another step because of biological um, malfunction. That it's the end of it all.
Very interesting. Um, my mind is going all over the place. I'm gonna have many questions as we move along. Um, but this question here, where do people go wrong in their marriages?
Well, they stop. They use this expression. They say, "Oh, we just grew apart." Nobody ever just grew apart. People work hard to grow away from each other. So it's not a matter of we just grew apart. It's a matter of you stopped focusing on what you were meant to give to the other person. And of course, the other person feeling neglected is going to retreat, and no one is contributing to the growing of the relationship. And so, of course, the relationship is dead on the table. And then one or two of them discover, my gosh, it's gone. But it's not like they grew apart. They just stopped contributing to one another in a relationship.
So would you say that, well, then is that really considered true love or so-called true love between two
Well,
people?
yeah, true love is a difficult thing to talk about. It certainly is an infatuation. Uh, it's the kind of marriage, or the kind of love that is suitable for a marriage is where you don't just feel happy for the other person's um, good events in life, and you don't just feel bad or sad because something bad or sad has happened to this other person. Rather, you've gotten so invested in the other person that the things that make them happy make you happy also. Not happy for them, but you feel yourself enjoying their happiness. And when something bad happens to them, say he or she gets cancer, you feel hit in the gut as well, as though you had been hit with the frightening consequences of a potentially lethal disease. You don't feel sorry for them. You too feel that you have been hit with the lethal disease. So it's when people no longer feel that bond that something's gone horribly wrong in a marriage.
It's very interesting because you're so right. Like when your spouse is sick, you're riding the same wave,
Mm-hmm.
and whether you're feeling okay or not, when you're around them, you get those waves and that energy, and you also feel the same way. That's very interesting. I guess that grows deeper the longer you stay in marriage.
The wrong way of saying married is when you take it as though it's just a burden that you have to shoulder for the other one. If you got married for the right reason, you had to know there were going to be bad times ahead. Bad times that happen because maybe someone gets in a bad mood for a little while, or bad times because of a lethal disease or because of financial disaster. Life has good times and bad times ahead. And when you marry, it's because you wanted to incorporate a couple that were going to
Mhm.
be a social device that had its own existence. And so either one of you takes it on the nose because of some kind of traumatic event. You both have taken it on the nose and you both will get through it. That's the attitude and the commitment of a marriage that goes a distance. And every time a couple works their way through one of those downfalls, they come out stronger. They don't throw in the towel saying that was so down and dirty, I can't take it. I can't take it doesn't belong in anybody's marriage vocabulary. The intent has to be, oh, what do we do now? And if
Wow.
one of the partners has been hit with a gut blow, such as a significant disease, the other partner really has to come up to the plate and say, I'm going to figure out what I can do to help. I mean, no matter what goes on, I'm going to be here to help.
And I
End of
guess
story.
half, yeah, and I guess half of these illnesses or the major conditions, um more than medicine, the love works, the support works. Just knowing that person is right there next to you,
Mm-hmm.
it gives you longer life.
It does.
All right, moving along. How many different ways can a marriage go wrong?
Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote a poem one time, a very lovely poem called How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. I love thee to the breadth and depth and light heights my soul can reach. Well, the same thing goes for how many ways can a divorce go wrong? We could have a poem reading something like the same thing. There's a gazillion ways that a marriage can go wrong. And nobody can anticipate every one of those. And so you can't keep looking for behaviors that signal whether you're doing well or badly. What you can monitor is your intent to continue to support the other person's success with you in the social entity that is now called Mr. and Mrs. whatever it might be.
Hmm. So would you say that divorce is a one-way or two-way street, or is divorce always a two-way street?
Well, marriage is always a two-way street. I mean, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be driving along side by side. Our our psychological engines are tuned in to move at different speeds, and so that'll vary at times. Our intellectual development will move at different speeds, but the couple that's married should recognize that whenever your intellectual development or your emotional development or whatever surges ahead of the other, that's now your job to bring that to them to help them move up. And same when they move up, and they will advance you in certain things that they too remember that they've got to then bring those things back into your world as well. When we decide not to live together, there used to be this old slogan in pop psychology that would say, 1 and 1 makes 11, not 2. 1 and 1, two people standing alongside each other. Oh, that's nonsense. 1 and 1 makes a couple. And if you didn't intend on making a couple, you shouldn't have gotten married. And no, you don't stand alone side by side, because that's two individuals just hanging out together. In marriage, you intend to make a social entity that has never before existed. And that social entity is going to be, it's going to play a role in what credit cards you get from people. It's going to play a role in invitations you get from friends. It'll always be now, forevermore, the two of you.
So, as you said, marriage is a two-way street. So that means naturally divorce is always going to be a two-way street?
No, divorce doesn't have to be a two-way street. It's interesting. Marriage takes two people to commit. It only takes one person to divorce. Now, that's a scary thought for a lot of people. And if that's a scary thought to you, then you need to be thinking more about the relationship that you're in, the marriage you're in, or if you're contemplating a marriage, if the idea of, geez, it only takes one person to divorce, but two to get married, then, you're already in a very precarious position. More and more young people are living together instead of getting married. And more of those that do to get together are insisting on prenups. And when you're insisting on prenups, it's like you're already showing doubt of what might happen. And you say, well, what's the wise thing to do? I mean, after all, there are so many divorces. Yeah, I understand that. But what kind of baggage do you want to carry into the marriage? The baggage that says, I'm aware of those numbers and that scares me? Or the baggage that says, sometimes we do reckless things, and one of the reckless things I'm willing to do right now is make this social unit without the guardrails to protect myself should something go awry.
Interesting. Okay, so what do people do right after getting a divorce? Is it the same for men as it is for women?
Wow. Well, no, we know it's not the same. Women usually have tight-knit relationships with the women, and other women will quickly group around the woman that's getting divorced, and they'll go, "Oh, honey, we're so sorry about what happened, and why don't you come over tonight? I'm making casserole, and Jenny's going to be over, and Margaret's going to be over, and we'll just have a good time." And that helps with the woman who's getting divorced. For guys, guys will listen to another guy's woe story about divorce, but guys just don't want to hear another guy whining on about his divorce. And so if he calls up, he gets one chance to call up his friend and moan about his getting divorced. Joe, man, this happened to me and blah, blah, blah. Well, his friend Joe will listen to him one time. So he can whine for half an hour at one time. But after that, Joe is happy to go play racquetball with him, to go for a run with him, maybe go bowling with him. But no, I don't want to listen to you anymore on this. I'm still your friend. If you need a loan, count on me. I'm happy to loan you some money. I'm not the shoulder for you to lean upon. That's just the way we guys are typically.
So you're saying women will probably find more support?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, in your book, you write that insurance companies often argue that they should be able to charge men more for car insurance after a divorce. Why is that?
Because the evidence is there. Men who get divorced are much more likely to suffer a morbid event, whether getting illness that puts them in the hospital or getting in a car accident that puts them in the hospital. And a little footnote to that with men, that car accident is often accompanied by alcohol intake.
Mm.
And women are much less likely to suffer a morbid event. The data is there. And so the insurance companies want to say, well, because the data is there, we want to be able to charge men more for their insurance, whether it be car insurance or health insurance, in the 2 to 3 years after a divorce, because we know we're much more likely to have to pay a man some kind of money in terms of insurance than we are a woman following the 2 or 3 years following a divorce.
So who initiates most divorces, men or women, like according to
Oh,
the
great question. Back if you watch movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s, you always got the idea that divorce was because some successful man ran off with his secretary. And so that men were the ones that, were initiating most divorces. Beginning somewhere in the 70s, and I don't remember when it was, but somewhere in the 70s. And it's been that way ever since. Women initiate most divorces, statistically speaking.
That sounds out of this world, because I didn't think that there would be enough data to support that kind of claim.
Yeah.
Wow. And is that still true today? Like from the 70s, is that still true today?
It's true up until the last time I looked, which was 2018.
Wow. So that means men better be careful to commit, right? Because they want to make sure that they don't end up paying high insurance, or they don't end up in that route.
Well, and given something we've already talked about, it also ties into who is it that usually wants a prenup?
Okay.
And so it's because of what they fear could occur ahead. And so it's not a good thing for young people as they're contemplating marriage today, that when is it wise to do these things like, prenup, or not to get married at all because these things don't last, or I'm not happy, so I'm going to leave. What should keep me? Why should I be? Why should my happiness be abandoned? If that is the stuff that you're considering and thinking about when you're contemplating marriage, don't do it. You're just not ready to marry yet. That stuff is not the stuff that builds good marriages.
Yeah, a lot of Eastern countries where they had arranged marriages, the divorce rates were very low, but now it's not that far behind. A lot of divorces are happening even in arranged marriages, and love marriages. That was already happening, but it's shocking that the arranged marriages, that system is now slowly fading away, because the divorce rates are high in many of those Eastern countries where arranged marriages were tradition for a long time.
It's interesting what people have thought as the rate of divorce. That 50% married that claim that 50% of marriages end in divorce was getting batted around in the late 80s and then early 90s. And the big thrust finally came when George Gallup of the Gallup poll ran a study. And on his study, he found that 50% of marriages were ending in divorce. But he set up his database on the wrong type of figures. If you wanted to study how many people that get married are getting divorced, and you've only got so much money to spend, so you're going to do the statistical study, what is going to be the population you study, and what ages and all that? Well, his competitor at the time, Lou Harris, thought, I've got George on this one, because he did the wrong study. You know who really cares whether or not you're married? It's the IRS. And so, because it changes your tax status.
Yes.
And so Lou Harris went into this tax records to look at, how many people's tax standings were changed because of divorce. And Lou Harris found out that we hadn't gotten anywhere close to a 50% divorce rate at the time that Gallup had come up with those numbers. It was down around 30, 35%. And throughout into the 90s, it was still far less than 50%. The divorce rate didn't hit 50% until roughly the mid 90s. And I don't know what it is now, but it's almost as though we talked ourselves into it. That number got out there of 50% 7 or 8 years before we were ever close to it. And people just talked as though that is the way it is. And that is the way it became after we talked about it so much. Now, where does it stand? I don't know. But given all the fear that young people have about the institution of marriage, I got a hunch it's pretty darn high.
Also, that's why you included not just the George Gallup statistics, but you said
Lou
his
Harris.
competitor, yeah, Law Harris did that study showing that Gallup was wrong about the percentage at the time. So
Mhm.
most likely, what data did Harris discovered to prove Gallup wrong is still valid today. Most likely,
It's
it's valid
yeah,
today,
yeah.
right?
It's far more likely to be valid today. But as I say, we may have talked ourselves into that validity because when it was first talked about, it was horribly errant, but people were talking as though this institution was terribly dangerous to to individual well-being. Oh, I think I love him now, or I think I love her now. But who knows what could happen in the future? And every little argument which a couple got into, is this a harbinger of the end? Your parents got in arguments, but they didn't get divorced. And uh, we just created too much fear around the institution rather than looking at how we study and understand the successful reserves the institution has for the psychological and intellectual and physical well-being of each member of this social unit that's now called a couple, a married couple.
So, this concludes the questions for part one. But I do want I do want to see if you can elaborate more on subject of love, right? Do you believe it's necessary for two people to have love before they get into a marriage, or
No,
love does love develop after you are married?
I think love takes a long time to develop. And so, marriage is only a step in that direction. And, hopefully you've taken that step in that direction with the right person. And going through the ups and downs is what brings you further and further into love. The little arguments or the good times that you had before marriage are not the stuff of love, but they are fun. And they are the excitement of romance. And romance is nifty, but romance isn't the thing that is the foundation of marriage and love. And since love takes so long to develop, and we can get married much quicker than that, we need to recognize if we're going to get married, it's because we're working toward love. You haven't got, well, we got that love thing out of the way because we're married now. No, you got married, so now roll up your sleeves because the real challenge of falling in love begins.
So not one of those Vegas chapel weddings.
No.
No, but it is very interesting. Many people, I think many people have the definition of love very wrong. It's what we see on TV or what they show on movies. But in reality, love is much deeper. It's much more divine
The
between a man and a
reality,
woman.
the reality TV show that leads to more successful marriages is not The Bachelor. It's not Love is Blind. It's not Married at First Sight. This is amazing. It's Big Brother. More marriages that happen between contestants on Big Brother are still existing and they are married than any of those reality romance shows.
Wow, wow. And that's because they
Work
got to
together.
spend time together, and then they said, hey, this could work, and then the love comes after the
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting, Dr. Wagner. Ellie. I know like love has so many different forms. It's easy for people like me to just say I love you, and then you can interpret that the million different ways,
Mhm.
right? But I believe in the strength of marriage. I believe that two people, I mean, that commitment is not just something you sign on paper. It has to be implemented. It has to be in action. So I think you mentioned it like it will come in second part, but I know you mentioned it in your book that it has to last, literally, death do us part.
That's right.
Like it has to go to that level.
You are inventing an entity that has never before existed in the entire history of the world. You're inventing a Mr. and Mrs. Smith that
Hmm.
has never existed. Your Mr. and Mrs. Smith has never existed before. Now, have you got the go with all to keep that creation till the very end? Or are you fragile and weak and you don't know what it means to build such an institution?
So why is it called an institution? Like why is marriage called an institution? I just want to pick your brain on that. I know
Yeah.
it's not part of the
Well,
book, but I want to.
because it brings more than one person together with another person, and because there are rules and regulations that affect it. In every country of the world, there are rules and regulations that affect it. And that's why it's very telling when you have couples that say, "Oh, we don't need marriage. We love each other and we want to just, be together." Well, if you say that you love each other and we just want to be together and you don't want to formalize it, you don't really want to build the convention of marriage that is meant to develop love further down the road. I asked, we might even finish this off this. I asked an old couple, people that are now my age, but when I first started collecting data for this many years ago, what's the worst thing about getting old? Assuming your health is okay.
Mhm.
And this couple had been together for like 40 or 50 years. And they said, they looked at each other and they thought quietly, and then they said this: guilt. I said, guilt? And they said, yeah. And not, this doesn't mean that we cheated on each other, although that could have been, that would cause guilt. But throughout life, you often do things that cause you guilty. You cheat on a tax return. You do a colleague dirty so you can get the promotion at work instead of that other person. And you look in the mirror when you get to be old, and that person you see has done all those things, and you can't make amends for the things you've done wrong. It's too late. Many of the people you hurt, they may have died, or they moved to the other part of the world. You don't know where they are. It's just too late. And if you took somebody to be, it's you and I for all the world, and then you pushed them away, you can't now come back 20 years later, 30 years, you know what, maybe I did that a little too quick, or I'm sorry. It doesn't work. And
Mhm.
you can't make up for that mistake again. So, you want to have a happy life? Have a happy marriage. That's advice for both the man and the woman. Make your partner happy. Don't worry about being happy yourself. The more that you love, the more that you should aim at the other person's happiness. And the more you succeed at that, the happier you'll be. And it goes both ways. As you asked me before about two-way street, there's your
Mhm.
two-way street.
So I'm just curious. Would you say that couples that have been married for a long time, um, with children, would the marriage be stronger, or can the marriage grow into can the marriage grow stronger with even without having kids, like without having children?
Children are just another challenge. And I don't mean to minimize that or to maximize it. Let's say you marry someone and that person won the lottery and they bring 3 million bucks into your life. And you say, oh, wouldn't that be nifty? No, 3 million bucks could destroy your marriage. It all depends on
Mhm.
how you respond to that challenge of having that sudden newfound wealth. It was my lottery ticket, not yours. Why do you want so much stuff? I mean, what do you mean you need a hunting boat or whatever? No, I was my lottery ticket. So that can be a challenge. You bring a newborn baby into the world, and that's so cute. And that's my jeans that I'm looking at, and pooped on me, and I got to change its diaper, and then I got to pay for it to go to college, and yeah, that's another challenge. $3 million. Doesn't that look nifty? Yeah, but it's another challenge. How are you going to manage a challenge? Baby, really nifty, but how are you going to manage that challenge? It all depends on how the two of you come together to grasp the challenge together and move forward.
So it really comes down to the individual themselves on what love is for them and what the
No,
word marriage, no,
it's what love is for us.
for us together. Okay. And then what marriage is for both of them.
How you can design, because your marriage you can pretty much design. You can't design the feelings of love. But how can you design your marriage to fuel the feelings of love forevermore?
Wow. Okay. It's just really amazing how two strangers can come together to become one, and then, I mean, gives me chills.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful feeling, very beautiful feeling. I myself have been married for 20 years, so 2 decades, and still feel like it was yesterday.
that's
Still feels
wonderful.
like yesterday, yes. So that's why I asked the question, because would having children change that, or would I feel the same if I don't ever have kids? So,
Yeah.
you know,
It all depends on how well you guys are managing challenges in your life. If you know how to work together and having challenges, having children is one more challenge. Sometimes it's wonderful, sometimes it's a pain in the neck. It's a challenge. You'll handle
mm,
it to the extent that you know how to work together, just like you'll handle a $3 million winning if you know how to work together. If you don't know how to work together, neither one of those is going to be just a blessing to you. It all depends on, are you going to work together? And it shouldn't be like laboring at together. It means let's work together.
but it that means it's you have to be very selective. So a young woman out there thinking, oh, I have a boyfriend or I have this or that, but you have to be very selective, and take the time to select that right person, because this is something that you're going to take it with you until you die or the other person
Yeah.
leaves.
You want to think about being very selective and, have I picked the right person? And every time you're thinking about that, you should be thinking about to yourself, am I the right person? If I think there's all these things that this other person should have, I ought to be thinking to myself, and these are all things I should have. Do I have them? And if I don't have them, then I'm not ready to capture somebody else until I prepared myself to be able to give to them what I'm hoping they will give to me.
That's true. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So thank you so much for this profound talk. I'm amazed as always with the way you explain, and your book. We will continue on in a second part for love trauma. Thank you so much for putting that. So whoever's interested in reading more about the love trauma, there's much more. This is just not even half of the book that the points are taken. It's much more deep. It goes in deep. We will discuss some other topics in the next recording for part 2. Dr. Wagner, thank you so much for this. I love this subject. I know we're going to go deeper in the next conversation, but you also have another book, I guess a sequel to this.
A sequel to this for adults dating, adults between, say, 25 and 50.
Okay, I'm super excited about that one too. So once we cover the topics from love trauma, we're going to discuss the beyond love trauma.
Yeah.
I hope you're ready.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dipal.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. Bye-bye.